Moving on from good to great teams requires diversity. But of course, diversity is not an easy thing to master, and diversity can mean very different things to different people. Is it about gender? Is it about inclusion of people with disabilities? Is it about keeping different personalities on the team? How we integrate different skills? Maybe it's about different nationalities or ethnicities, etc. It certainly is true that when there is a greater similarity amongst a group, things do seem to run much smoother for a while. Because you see, most of us don't like the difficulties that diversity brings. And so when we are with people who are similar to ourselves, everything seems to run much more smoothly, we make decisions more quickly, and so forth. But it can lead to a problem that has been termed groupthink. There was a study done where they they had let's say 5 people in a room, and they asked them to look at these 2 lines and decide. There was one fixed line, and then there was another that was a bit longer, about the same, and a bit shorter. And they were asking the people which one is the one that's about the same as the fixed line. And they had 5 people lined up, and the first one would say, "Well, I think it's line number B." The next one would say, "Yeah, it's definitely B." Next one would say, "It's B." Next one would say, "Yeah, that's B." And then would come the 5th one. And the 5th person had to decide, because they're looking at it and thinking, it's not B. It's definitely not B. It's got to be A. And what they don't know is that the other 4 people in the room, they're actually all actors who have been told to say B. They don't know that. But they've heard B, 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 and they're thinking A, but do I have the courage to say it? And actually, many times, if not, actually it is the majority of the time, most people will go with what's called social conformity. And because they don't want to look different, they don't want to be the odd one out, they will also say B, even though they know that that's not the right answer. And this thing of social conformity, it happens in our meeting rooms as well, where, around the table, people will say, "Oh, I think such and such. Oh, yeah, I also think that such. I think that too," particularly if somebody powerful says it. Everybody else tends to jump on and to agree, even though inside they might actually have little doubts, but they're not going to voice those doubts, and even they start to suppress those doubts within themselves. There's actually a couple of studies that were done to show that we are actually willing to suppress our own judgment and to protect our reputation in the moment, even when we are under quite some personal risk. They did an experiment where they put a person in a room where there was they had to fill in a form. And whilst they were filling in the form, there was other people in the room as well, also filling in this form. And then, in the background, all the other people are actors. They know what is going to happen. And so, they're in the room filling up this form. And then at some point, this fire alarm goes off. And all the other people in the room, they completely ignore it. They just carry on filling in the form. And the one person is thinking, but the fire alarm, shouldn't we do something about it? But they don't say anything because nobody else has reacted at all. Everybody else just carries on filling in the form. Then the people who are carrying out the experiment, they actually start letting smoke start drifting under the door. And, because nobody else responds, nobody else reacts, the one person, they will continue to carry on filling in the form because they don't want to look silly. They don't want to say anything. They don't want to be different. They don't want to be the odd one out. And so on average, they will stay there 13 minutes after the alarms have sounded, which actually, if they don't know that actually this is a complete setup. But if it was real and there's a fire alarm going off and there's smoke coming under the door, it should trigger in them, I have to get out of this building. But actually, they're under this social pressure to conform, and they feel it so strongly they will even essentially risk their life by staying in the building for too long, for 13 minutes after the alarm has gone off. It's incredible. And so you have to be aware that in your meetings, groupthink is a very real thing. Because actually the pressure in a meeting may not be anything like having smoke coming under the door. You know, people are definitely going to be falling for this social conformity, particularly when people's desire for group cohesion or group consensus is greater than their own sense of personal opinion. You know, if it is more important that we as a group function well together, if that is more important than my opinion, then groupthink is a possibility. And of course, that equation is true many times. You know, very often, particularly in cultures where there is high sense of hierarchy. So we should follow what the boss says. We should work together when there is a communal sense, where there's high sense of relationship. Of course, we are going to put the group feeling as being more important than our personal idea. But this is dangerous for the organization. Let's look a little bit at some of the warning signs of how do we recognize when groupthink is happening, is at least, you know, is starting to affect the team. When we as a team might be thinking, oh yeah, this decision that we are taking, well, it affects them, but it doesn't affect us, there is a risk of groupthink. When the group starts to ignore warnings that might challenge our opinion, you know, where you have somebody that comes in from outside of the group and says, hey, don't you realize that this situation is going to be affected by your decision? And the group says, yeah, but you know, that's not what we think. Here is another sign groupthink is kicking in. When the group feels that they are morally right. So even when logical arguments come to the contrary, they say, yeah, but we are right. Even if the logic doesn't make sense, this is another danger. When people start to see those who disagree as falling into a group, you know, when we say, oh well, they think that, they say that, and they become a group of people rather than a series of individuals, that's another sign something's going wrong. When we think about disloyalty, or when we think of disagreement as being like disloyalty, that's a strong sign something has gone wrong. We should be able to disagree with one another at the table. We should be able to disagree with the boss. We should be able to disagree with the chairman of the meeting. If we feel that we can't disagree because that would also be disloyal, something has gone wrong and we are heading for bad decision making. Or it may be that we feel the need to keep controversy quiet. You know, actually, we know that there are people at this table who disagree, but they're not going to say it. That's another sign something's gone wrong. And when maybe the chairman says, okay, do we all agree with this? When silence becomes a yes, that is another sign groupthink is a problem for you. And, you know, sometimes there can be real disagreements around the table, but those things are kept secret and people don't want to open up. This again is another sign groupthink is a problem in your team. Okay, what is the problem with groupthink? Well, if we are in this kind of mindset, it tends to mean that we look at a fewer number of alternatives. We go with the idea, particularly the idea that the powerful person said, that's it, that's what we're going with. We don't consider any further. Whereas really good decision making looks at many different ideas and then chooses the best one. It also means that often we don't properly understand the issues because the different opinions are not being voiced openly. It means that sometimes we're not really aware of the risks that are there because people are keeping quiet. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to cause trouble. Of course, it also does damage the organizational systems. We have a meeting in place because there are multiple opinions coming forward. But if it becomes actually just a talking shop for one powerful person to bring their opinion and everybody else just says yes, actually it's breaking the system that was put in place. In fact, there are many reasons why groupthink is dangerous. Okay, so what can we do about it then? Well, a couple of things, ideas for how we can avoid groupthink. One is to make sure that people are encouraged to bring their objections, their doubts, their fears, their disagreements. As the chairperson, as the leader, as a powerful person in the room, draw those out. Encourage people to talk about what they don't like, what they disagree with, because they may not find it easy to bring those things forward unless you positively encourage them. Just saying, okay, does anybody have any other opinions? That's not enough. That is not going to bring it forward. Maybe you need to appoint somebody as a critical friend, somebody whose job in the meeting is to point out things that are, to point out different opinions, to say, well, okay, this person has said that, another way of looking at it would be this, and he said this, well, the opposite of that could be this. It's just by creating it as a role in the meeting, it kind of legitimizes that person and they can say almost whatever they want without getting into trouble with the chairman. So maybe you need to appoint somebody to be that, the different one. I would also suggest that if you are the chairperson or the leader or the powerful person in the room, maybe don't express your opinions too early. If you say, well, this is what I think, what does everybody else think? The likelihood is they're just going to say yes. Whereas if you say, okay, I'll tell you what I think in a minute, but I want to hear from you first. What do you think? And work around. You've got a better chance of hearing what they actually think. Or it may be that you can break the meeting into different teams so that, one subgroup can look at this topic and another one can look at it and another one can look at it, and then those three opinions can come back and you can then hear different ideas coming forward. But certainly the chairperson needs to be there to say, let's look at different alternatives. Even when it comes to the point of saying, well, this is what I think, the chairperson still needs to go the next stage and say, but what other possibilities are there? And ideally, members should be allowed to discuss ideas outside of the meeting as well. Obviously, they have to keep confidentiality, but it shouldn't be the case that things can't be discussed. And of course, other viewpoints can be brought into the meeting. If we feel that the meeting is not progressing the idea well, we can bring in some expert, a consultant, somebody who can be nominated to come and join the meeting just for that agenda item, just to bring the point further. A couple of little further ideas, advice maybe that comes from the Bible. Courage, it's not about standing up to an enemy. Real courage is when you can stand up to a friend. Say that again. Courage is not about standing up to an enemy. Real courage is about standing up to your friends. And you have to think, whose approval matters to you most? If you are looking for the approval of the other people in the room, then you are likely to head towards social conformity and groupthink. But if you are looking for the approval of God or of the beneficiaries for whom your organization works, if that is the approval that you are looking for and you don't mind facing a bit of opposition from your teammates, you've got a much higher chance of beating groupthink. And, you can actually structure things to encourage healthy debate rather than blind conformity. We can try to create meetings and do things in a particular way so that we limit the risks that social conformity and groupthink can bring to our meetings.